A young man was graduating from high school. His school prom was coming up, and he wanted to take a girl with him to the celebration. But he didn't know what to do. He asked his dad for some help. "Oh, I can help you with that," the dad said. "Here's what I want you to do. Take the family car with you, and you can pick her up. When you get there, introduce yourself to her parents, and I want you to act like a gentleman. Thank them for letting you take their daughter out to that event, and then ask them what time would you like to have your daughter home, and be on time. After the party is over, take her back to her door, thank her for a lovely evening, and then before she goes in, kiss her gently on the forehead." The young man said, "Is that it?" His dad said, "Yep, that's it." Well, the young man did. He went to the young lady's house. He introduced himself as a gentleman. He thanked them for the privilege of letting them him taking their daughter out. "What time would you like your daughter home?" "I'd like her home before midnight." "All right." So they went, they had a great time, and he was home on time. He took her up to the door, and before she went in, he said to her, "I want to thank you for a lovely evening." And then he kissed her gently on the forehead. Well, when he did, she was smitten, and she said to him in a luring voice, "Do you think you could do that again, only this time a little lower?" And she closed her eyes, and she went like this. He said, "Well, I'll try." So he stood up straight and he cleared his throat. "I want to thank you for a lovely evening." Once upon a time, another young man, many years before, he asked an elder for advice. The young man's name was Solomon. His father David had just died. He was the king. And now Solomon is going to be the king of Israel. He's gathered at Gibeon with his commanders and captains and his judges and all the heads of the family. And you remember the tabernacle, it was there. And they had just sacrificed. And now Solomon, the new heir to the throne, he was going to now be king. That night, at the temple, there in the tabernacle, God appeared to Solomon. And Solomon said to him, "I don't know what to do. I'm heir to the throne, but I've got no experience." God said to him, "What do you want me to do?" Solomon said, "My father, in his place, has given me a staggering task to lead your people, and I'm young, and I'm inexperienced, and I need help." Well, God said to him, "Well, what is it you're lacking?" Solomon replied, "I need wisdom. I've never led people before. I'm not my father. My father David, he was a giant among all these people. I'm just his son. I don't know what to do." Well, God was very impressed with Solomon's request. And he's going to give him his reply in the verse 11 of the first chapter of 2 Chronicles. Here was God's reply. "I can see that this came right from your heart, Solomon. You didn't ask for money, nor did you ask for wealth or fame. You didn't ask me to doom your enemies, and you didn't ask me for long life. What you asked for was wisdom and knowledge, so that you could govern my people, over whom I've made you king. Because of that, I'm going to give you what you've asked for. I'm going to give you wisdom. And because of that, I'm going to throw in a little bonus. You are going to get more money. You're going to get wealth and you're going to get fame. And it's going to be more than anything any other king on earth has ever received. Do you know what he got from God that day? Well, we know because we've read it in the book. If you read the life of Solomon and what he accomplished and his achievements, you're going to find that that man was an architect. He was an engineer. He became a financier and a psychologist. He was a teacher and a theologian. He was a diplomat and a king. He was an artist. He was a songwriter. He was a poet. And he was an author. Most of the book of Proverbs he wrote. How could somebody reach some unparalleled heights? Well, to Solomon's credit, he humbly asked for wisdom. Just those two things, wisdom and knowledge. And look at what he got. Now, I wanted you to move the clock ahead. Let's move it about 1,000 years from that conversation that Solomon had with God. James, who's our writer that we've been studying in the book of James, he wrote a letter to Jews. And these Jews are scattered in little huddles and little groups. They're refugees. They've been driven by the Roman persecution from their homeland. And James tells them, I know all of you are suffering. And I know lots of you have trials. And I know that some of you are very discouraged. But I want you to take heart. God has a purpose in all of this. And I'm going to give you some sound advice. Something that's going to get you through all this mess. Do you know what he told these dispersed Hebrews? He gave them the same advice that Solomon asked for centuries before. James wants them to ask for wisdom, just like Solomon did. Here's what he said. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men generously without reproach, and he will be giving it to you. James 1:5. Well, James starts off his book with Solomon's request. Lord, give me wisdom. I've never been king before. If wisdom is all that you're going to give me, well, I guess that's all I need, because if that's going to be my number one tool in my toolkit, then I think my toolkit will have enough for me to do the job. James begins his letter pretending that his new readers are those young Solomons. If any of you lack wisdom, just ask like Solomon did, and God will generously, without reproach, give it to you. Now, the word reproach, that's a cute word. It means that God won't make you look like a fool just because you ask. He won't embarrass you. If you are a recipient of this letter today that you got from James, and you are told that wisdom was there just for the asking, would you take it? We now come to the 13th verse of chapter 3 where we've been studying. James is now going to tell you why wisdom in life is so important. The wisdom that he's going to describe is not human wisdom. It's divine wisdom. It's something that God gives. Here's what he says, and you're not going to learn this in the classroom where you go to school. Who among you is wise and full of understanding? Let him show by his behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. Last week, the Masters Golf Tournament was held in Augusta, Georgia. It's the equivalent to the Super Bowl of golf. the best golfers from all over the world. They compete. And there are a lot of famous names in golf history that have won that tournament. Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, Gary Player, Tom Watson, Bubba Watson, Dustin Johnson, Tiger Woods. We even had a Canadian win it. His name was Mike Weir. The winner receives a green jacket and a trophy, along with the invitation to come back every year to compete from then on. This year's winner was a young American named Scotty Scheffler. He comes from Texas. He's 27 years old. His wife, Meredith, she couldn't attend that golf tournament. She was home expecting her first child. After Scheffler received the trophy and green jacket, he was asked by the press, having won the Super Bowl of golf, how is the rest of your life going to change with all that newfound fame? Scheffler gave a long pause. You could tell his inner wheels were turning. He then said something that really stunned these reporters, because he spilled his real life character. He told them his life's philosophy. The man's a Christian. Here was his answer. He said, the game of golf comes fourth in my life. Now, I am a fierce competitor. And when I play the game of golf, I play to win. And I play it for every game I'm in. I hate losing. But then he said, winning isn't everything to me in my life. Here are my 5 or 4 priorities. And he began to list them in order. Number 1, my faith is very important to me. God comes first in my life and in the life of my wife. 2, my wife Meredith, she comes second. She isn't with me this week, and I miss her so much. It's been a long, tiring week for me being away from her. And me here at this tournament, all alone, wasn't a lot of fun. 3, here's my 3rd. We're expecting our first child. It'll be a boy or a girl. I'm going to be a new father for the first time. And that's going to be more exciting to me than winning this green jacket and holding this trophy. And then he said 4th, golf. The game of golf comes 4th. When golf is over for me, I'm going to still hold fast those other 3 things that I just told you. Do you know what that young champion golfer said? He told those correspondents, trophies and green jackets, they can be counterfeit. The genuine article is wisdom. Scheffler was smart enough to know the difference. He showed those reporters that his good deeds through gentleness was a real mark of his wisdom. Well, James gives his readers now a little test. Do you know what the real article is? Verse 13, James 3. Who among you is wise and in his understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. Well, the first test is good behavior. Simply means tell the truth. Would the real you please stand up? What James is saying, someone who lives by the word of God is someone whose life is changing. And it's changing into good behavior. Here's a second test. He calls it gentle deeds. It's the picture of a spiritual a spirited thoroughbred horse under control with that bit in his mouth. The bit is called wisdom. Gentle deeds. It's like the soothing medication that brings comfort to that painful sore on your foot. The test of wisdom is life that's patterned after God's truth and in God's control. If you read what Paul said in the book of Timothy, you kind of get what James is driving at, because in 2 Timothy 2:24, and this is from the Message Bible, here's what Paul says: God's servants must not be argumentative, but a gentle listener and a teacher who keeps his cool, working firmly and patiently with gentleness, correcting those who are in opposition. Don't be argumentative. Are you like that? You men out there that are listening to me, are you argumentative with your wife? Let me tell you a story. This week, Mary and I, on our day off, we rode down to the little town of Okotoks. It's a little town just south of Calgary. And we wanted to visit a man whom I had counseled 40 years ago. And he wanted me to meet his wife and come for lunch. Well, what an experience I had. The couple was lovely. And their house was just as nice. Let me tell you what I learned in that visit down to Okotoks. I learned the true meaning of argumentative. In their house, on the walls, were exquisite landscape paintings. And they were all originals. I didn't count them all. They were on every floor of the house. There was a painting of a herd of buffalo. There's another painting of the famous Okotoks rock that you see coming in from the highway. There's a painting of the High River grain elevators. There's another painting of the family farm with attending grain bins and outbuildings. There's another painting of a beautiful Lake Louise scene with the mountains and that emerald lake and the glaciers in the background. There's another painting of his grandchildren sitting on a cliff overlooking the majestic mountains. Another painting was an eagle in flight. And there was a downtown painting of a little Alberta town at sunset. I said to the host, "Who painted these?" His wife said, "My mother did." I looked a little more closely at the paintings to see if she signed them. Sure enough, there in the bottom corner of every painting, she had signed the word Ginger. I said to the host, "Your mother painted all these paintings?" "Yes." "And the one that you're just looking at was her last painting. She finished that when she was 95 years old before she died." "Well, how many paintings did she do?" I said. She said, "Probably hundreds." I said, "Hundreds?" "Yep." And she said often she was commissioned by wealthy people and people as far away as New York who wanted a painting of something she had sent that they wanted her to repeat. I said to her, "When did she start painting?" Here comes my lesson on argumentative. Ginger, the host's mother, she only started her painting career when she was 65 years old. She hadn't even reached the Canadian old age pension yet, but that's when she started. Her husband, whom she lived with all her life, wouldn't let her paint. All her marriage, she had deep down inside her that beautiful gift that she could never use. It remained hidden and locked up. It couldn't be released. It was like a frozen asset. For years, she lived with a husband who threatened her. He would beat her if she touched a canvas or a brush. All she could do for all those years in that troubled marriage was hope and even wish. It never happened. When the subject of painting came up, he was always argumentative. And she submissively gave in, and the subject was dropped. He finally died. The bird was let out of the cage. Suddenly Ginger. She showed up at Calgary Stampede. She displayed 20 of her own fresh paintings. And she was putting them up on the wall next to some very famous painters. And I'm talking about Robert Bateman and Georgia Jarvis. And she told them all that was the beginning of her career that she launched when her wicked husband was gone. A new day dawned for Ginger. When you come to the book of James, chapter 3, and you get to verse 14, James is going to come down pretty hard on you. He's going to express your hidden motives, just like that man expressed his argumentative to Ginger. If you have something deep in your heart, says James, like Ginger's husband had, that spills over on other lives and makes them miserable, and you too, James tells its source and why you're so argumentative. Verse 14. Don't be arrogant. Don't lie against the truth. This wisdom is not which comes from above. It's earthly. It's natural and it's demonic. James says your behavior comes right from the devil and you've become arrogant. You know, and back in ancient times, the word arrogance, it was used to describe a person who boasted about winning an election dishonestly. Have you ever heard anything like that around in our lifetime? Arrogance is sin. There's an old expression. Grace humbles a man without degrading him, but it also exalts a man without inflating him. That's what wisdom does for you. Okay, let's close our lesson. Remember how I started? Can you do that again? Only this time a little lower? A young student asked his dad, "What do I do?" I want you to speak to God this week. And if you suffer from arrogance, if you find that life is out of step, and you find it's out of step with Scripture that you read, and you've been listening to the drumbeat of the devil, I want you to know you're listening to the wrong source. In verse 15 of James 3, he says you're following false wisdom. This earthly wisdom, that's the world standard. That's what they call success. And they think those earthly motives and attitudes are right. James says, no, they're not. Remember Solomon? Remember how well he started off? Lord, give me wisdom. God did. Solomon said in Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge. Only fools despise that instruction. Solomon said that in the springtime of his life. But in the autumn of his life, Solomon ceased to fear the Lord. He felt now that he's got everything. He could now depend on his own wisdom. And he lost it. The world's wisest man became the world's wisest fool. I don't want you to do that. I want all of you that have been listening to me now to finish well. I want to see you next week. James, in his book, He has some further instructions for you, and I want to tell them to you. And when you come back, I don't want you to miss it. Thanks for joining me today.